Do you guys believe Kyle Rudolph when he said at his, I don't know what you would call it, I guess off-season workout kickoff press conference, when he says, all you guys who are ragging on me and calling for my demise, Judd and Matthew and all you score Northerners, do you think Kyle Rudolph is just entering the prime of his career, like he says?
I'll just go quickly. No, he's not. Listen, it's not his demise. He is who he is, which is not a bad player, but he's nowhere. But to paint this picture that he is Ertz or anywhere near, let's say, a Gronk, not Gronk, but let's just say in that area code, he's not. So no, but to me, this is not about, well, I was great or he was great. And we're talking about him like he has fallen off this cliff. He's a nice player, but that's it. So it's almost like he's defending himself like he was fantastic. To me, he is not a bad player. I'll be very clear about that. But he's never lived up to the expectation that we all had, which was he could move into that very elite and, by the way, small group of great receiving tight ends. To me, it's that simple. So he's almost sort of misjudged this by acting like we're saying your career is going downhill. No, you just were never that fantastic.
I don't know. The numbers, you can make numbers say whatever you want them to say if you know how to work them. And you could make the case that Kyle Rudolph is still a very good player, and you could make the case that Kyle Rudolph doesn't have a lot left in the tank. This is from the article today at The Athletic. And Judd, you said he's not Rob Gronkowski or Jimmy Graham or one of these guys. But since he was a second-round pick in 2011, he's fourth among tight ends in touchdowns behind only Rob Gronkowski, Jimmy Graham, and Antonio Gates, but 33rd in receiving yards per game. So that's the big picture of the good and the bad when you talk about Kyle Rudolph. And if you look at his numbers just from last year, a high in yards per target at 7.7, 64 catches on 82 targets. That was the best catch percentage, 78% of all tight ends who played at least 10 games. And it was the fourth straight season in a row that Rudolph has started all 16 games after he had injury problems early in his career. So that's the good. The bad is just 4 touchdowns last season, the least he's had since 2014. Just 8 red zone receptions, down from 14 a year before that and 15 2 years earlier, and the second most in the NFL that season. So my question when we talk about Kyle Rudolph, who has been better than what we saw last year, is how much of the drop-off in Kyle Rudolph is just the natural decline of a tight end who's approaching age 30, and how much of the drop-off for Kyle Rudolph, where there were drop-offs, because like I said, some of the numbers are promising, how much of that was Kirk Cousins and an offense that never really hit on all cylinders?
I think you hit on the age thing here. Although I if I could rephrase on behalf of Kyle Rudolph, I would have said instead, it's more accurate to suggest that he has multiple productive years left than to say he's just entering his prime, because there's so much evidence in the last 15 or 20 years. I don't know if I grabbed all of the top-ish tight ends of the last 10 or 15 years, but I was curious, when are the peak years for pass-catching tight ends the last 10 or 15 years in a pass-happy league? And then when do guys either retire or really start to fade out? And Rob Gronkowski, his peak was age 25 to 26, retired by 29, although he could probably still grind out a few mediocre years if he really wanted to. And he might decide he wants to come back. He put a dent in the Super Bowl trophy, didn't he?
That was hilarious. Did you guys see the
He
footage
squared
of
up
him
to Buck?
actually doing it? It's so funny.
It's completely Gronk.
It's absolutely Gronk.
Jimmy Graham, you mentioned, Ramie. Well, his peak, he's still in the league at like 32. His peak was 25 to 27.
Not pretty.
So he's 5 years past his prime and just grinding out. He'll catch, 40 passes or whatever. He had 10 touchdowns a couple years ago. Jason Witten, his peak was 25 to 30. Vernon Davis, his peak was 25 to 29. Heath Miller, 27 to 30. Jeremy Shockey, 25-26, and then he just kind of coasted for 5 years. Antonio Gates, still in the league and still productive.
Literally forget he's still in the league. For like 2 years now, I see him catch a touchdown or something.
He retired for a while, right?
He's like 38.
He's still around.
He's 38, and his peak was 10 years ago.
I thought they convinced him to come back, because he I think was definitely going to retire at one point in the past couple of years, and then came back.
Yeah. Tony Gonzalez, his peak actually did last until about 31 or 32, and then he retired at 37. But like all of the different comps you could make, and some of these guys are way better than Rudolph, but their peak was 3 years ago for Kyle. Or maybe it gets to age 30 and that's where he's emerging out of. But he could still be productive for 4 or 5 years. I'm not going to deny him that.
Yeah.
But Phil, don't you feel in watching him on a game by game basis throughout his career, don't you feel like at his peak of being his best, he's been a very nice, good player. But I've never watched him and thought, oh my God, there is a top 3 tight end. So
and that's fine.
Yeah, no, but the notion, I feel like there's this notion among some that he was this phenomenal player at one time among the elite, and now he's saying, no, I'm still there. That's never to me been the debate. The debate has always been he is a nice player, and if you can get the most from him, that's fine. But I never put him in. I think it's, if you look at the stats from afar, it's easy to say, oh, that guy, I'd love to have that guy. But then you see him play on a week-by-week basis, and you say that, okay, that's a nice player. But it's like Cousins. He's a nice player.
Yeah.
But statistically, if you looked at what he did with Washington, just the total stats, you said to yourself, got to have him probably. And now you say, okay, he's okay.
There were a few years there, and probably age 25, 26, 27 years, where as an outsider looking in, I always thought, I'd like to see what Kyle Rudolph could be if he had a Tom Brady or a Drew Brees or somebody who's made, megastars out of tight ends in the offense that they play in. I thought, we don't know this for sure, but I watched him and thought there might be something there that's a lot better than what we've seen. And he just hasn't been in the right situation with the right guy throwing him the football. But at this stage in his career, I think if there ever was hope that he could be one of those upper echelon type of tight ends, I think those days are probably gone.
You know who else is still amazingly still in the NFL as I go through tight ends the last 10 or 15 years? Ben Watson.
Is he still playing?
That dude played for the Patriots in like 2003.
Yeah.
Benjamin Watson. He was with the Saints last year.
Wow.
He's 38, going to be 39.
Jimmy Graham is sad to watch now.
It really is.
Watching him try and play now, because he was a really nice player, is sad.
And I tried to tell people last year when he signed with the Packers, everybody, and there is truth to this, everybody thought the reason Jimmy Graham's production dropped off was because Seattle didn't know how to use him. They signed a pass-catching tight end and asked him to block like 30, 40% of the time. And I was like, yeah, you're right. But while he was there not being used right, he also aged 3 years. So don't expect the Jimmy Graham who played for the Saints to walk into Packers camp because he's 3-4 years older than that guy ever was. Yes, the way that they used him did lead to a drop-off in production, but also getting older in the NFL doesn't help matters that much either.
Yeah. So I think it's inaccurate to say just emerging into his prime. That's a little over the top. But like Kyle Rudolph could catch passes in the NFL for 5 more years and be
absolutely
fine. And for the Vikings, it depends on, all right, well, how much do you want? If you want that to happen, how much are you compensating him in the salary cap league? Right?
I just don't want him to cost nearly as much as he presently does.
Yeah.
Is it possible that what he's saying is true, that the Vikings haven't approached him about a restructure? Because now for the second time, I'm reading quotes from Kyle Rudolph, who makes it seem like he is not only entirely agreeable to restructuring his deal, he would actually kind of prefer it. This is what he said: I would love to help our cap situation. If I can give us more room to bring in more players and better players, then you'd be foolish to turn something like that down. It doesn't make sense from a player's standpoint, but that's out of my control. That's between Rick Spielman, Rob Brzezinski, and my agent. I just come here to work every day. Like I said, I'm just trying to find out where I fit in. I can't imagine that with $2 million of cap space, not even enough to sign your draft picks, and him being the only candidate for restructuring. There are a couple of trade candidates on the roster, but he's really the only viable candidate for restructuring. If that's what him and his representatives are saying behind the scenes, and the Vikings have not approached them yet, I'm befuddled as to why that would be the case.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
It is, but they're so smart with cap stuff, and they have no fear of approaching popular players. So you'd love to be behind the curtain there and get the why.
Draft night trade, maybe.